Across the UK, this is Broadcast Revolution's Radio Road Trip.
Hello and welcome to Broadcast Revolution's Radio Road Trip. I'm Josh and I'm pleased to introduce you to Gareth Jones, the weekend and sport editor at BBC Radio Derby.
So, hi, I'm Gareth. I'm the weekend and sport editor at BBC Radio Derby, which means I take an active role in making all of our sports output across 7 days a week and our weekend sequence and specialist programmes.
So, Gareth, one of the things we're trying to cover within this podcast is to essentially introduce people to various different stations across the country. So if you were talking to somebody, if you were almost pitching BBC Derby to someone who's never heard of it before, never been to Derby before, what would you kind of say?
BBC Radio Derby is trying to be all things to all people because we don't want to alienate any part of our audience, and we appreciate that certain people come to us for certain things. So we know we've got a very loyal sports audience that come to us for Derby County, and ideally we'd like to move those people throughout the rest of the schedule. It's quite well known that the schedule has been standardised across local radio. We used to have a 3-hour schedule and we'd have quite a hard-hitting breakfast show, moving into more lifestyle at mid-morning and a bit of fun during the course of the afternoon. COVID came along and turned that all on its head. We now have a 4-hour schedule, but we like things that are very much in the interest patterns of our audience. So we have been bringing them all of the details to do with COVID. We've been telling them what they can do. So on weekends, as restrictions have lifted, we've sort of gone, right, you can now do this, but you can't do that. And we've tried to bring in new elements of styles of presentation. We've got a lot of our presenters have got strong connections to the patch, so they know the area inside out. You can name a place in the area, and some of our presenters will go, yeah, no pub in there, or that's the pub that I've been to, or yeah, I used to live there. And that's the sort of thing that sets us apart from, I think, our commercial opposition. We don't have any local commercial opposition in the area any longer. Peak, which was our commercial opposition in part of the area, has now been swallowed up by Bauer. So it's now, in effect, a network station that's being fed there. We lost our big commercial opposition, which was Ram FM many years ago when it was merged as part of the Capital Network. We've got a number of community stations which do the very, very similar thing, but on a more localised level. But I think we have the big overview of the whole area, and we cover quite a big area. We've got the city of Derby, which is still a relatively new city. It's only been a city for not even 50 years yet. And we've got the industrial towns dotted around the patch as well, but we've also got the Peak District, so we go as far up as Buxton, as far south as Burton-on-Trent, so it's quite a diverse area that we cover.
Now, you mentioned that there have been some changes to the schedules. Obviously, that's been something that's happened across the UK. Can you talk us through some of the big changes that have happened on BBC Radio Derby? So in terms of presenters moving around, what have been the big moves?
So what we ended up with, because we had 4 3-hour programmes before this came in, what we've ended up with is 3 4-hour programmes across the day between 6 and 6. And we've kept our breakfast presenter and our mid-morning presenter in the same place. What we lost was our lunchtime presenter, who was the big local name. He'd been in local radio around the area for 25 plus years on various stations. He moved to weekend mornings, Friday to Sunday, but we've been using him around the schedule as our cover presenter. So he's done quite a lot of mid-mornings over the past sort of 6 months or so since the schedule change came in. But this week he's just finished 2 weeks doing breakfast. It's August. We thought we'd try something a little bit different on breakfast, and I think it's been quite a refreshing tonic to have that. We've lost a number of presenters that were doing weekly programmes because they've been submerged into other programmes. So we've had a couple of people that have departed us over the course of the last 6 months, and there's a couple of programmes that don't exist anymore for those reasons as well. We used to originate an early show that went out to Radio Nottingham and Radio Leicester as well. There are no early shows across local radio. There's a one that comes out of Radio London that goes across the whole network. And similarly, we used to provide a Saturday late show, which was a soul and Motown programme that went out across the region. That's now been submerged and taken over by a show that comes out of Birmingham. So we've lost a chunk of the output that we were sharing, and we've lost a number of presenters on that basis as well.
So obviously challenging times. Obviously every station has faced similar challenges. How do you think, this is sort of putting you on the spot, but how do you think the audience has reacted to some of these changes?
I think there's been a little bit of upheaval with people. They don't like it when you make a change. We know that from past experience, that when you move their friend, they tend to get a little bit a little bit angry. There's been a lot of communication about why people have been moved, why we're in this schedule, why we're not doing some things that we were doing, and a lot of not quite understanding necessarily the position the BBC are in, or indeed the fact that it is a resilience factor in some cases why we're doing this. If we reduce the number of programmes, then it's reducing the number of people that are in the building at any given time.
Let's move on to slightly brighter topics. What do you think? Obviously, you work in local radio. Have you worked in local radio previously, and what do you think the best thing about local radio is?
So before, I've been back at Radio Derby now for just over 18 months. Prior to that, I did 11, 12 years in network, and prior to that, I was in local radio before. So it's changed a lot in the time since I've been away. Technology has forced a lot of change, so now we are interconnected, which is great, which means we can share content a lot easier than what we ever could before. I think the sound of local radio is a lot brighter than what it ever was. We're a lot more optimistic and forward-facing. When I left before, we were kind of starting to emerge out of that stage of very much a looking back station. In fact, the same for all stations in reality. We were very much this is what we've always done, and let's not move away from it. We're prepared to take a lot more risk in some of the things that we would commission, and I think that we come into our own. We've had quite a lot of, prior to COVID hitting this area especially, we've had quite a lot of things go on that we've had to respond to quite a lot. So, for example, last summer we had the Wadey Bridge stuff in the north of the area where we merged outputs with Radio Manchester and Radio Sheffield to bring the latest, because in the area that was one of those little intersection areas that actually it's no man's land. Nobody really owns it, but people tend to take an interest in it when something happens. And we also had quite serious floods around the November time in Derby, where the river that runs through the city centre was quite close to sort of bursting its banks at one point. So we've had to come together and do the true ethos of local radio, and then COVID happened. And I think that's the point where we come into our own. That's when we can do things that the commercial opposition haven't been able to do for a number of years. Even when I was here before and we still had proper commercial opposition, it was not the commercial radio that it was 20 years before that would do a bit of everything. It was, this is an 80% music station, we're just going to play chart hits and we're not going to really talk about what's going on. We come into our own, we tell people what's going on, we help them, we join them together. So the initiative of Make a Difference, which has been running now since the beginning of COVID, is one of those things where at the beginning it was, if you need help, we'll put you in touch with people who can help you. Now it's celebrating people helping other people. And I think that's the one thing that we can shine on, that bigger stations in terms of commercial groups and also BBC network stations can't necessarily do.
So it's interesting because we wanted to touch upon Make a Difference. It's obviously one of those things that reached its peak during COVID. Is it something that you think will stay across the BBC? Are you almost planning to keep it within Derby for the foreseeable?
I think it's staying within the whole local radio estate. It's been marked as something that is a successful idea, and it's been developed and moved through a little bit. So where it was at the beginning, bulletins of Joe Bloggs needs help, can somebody help Joe Bloggs? It's evolved slowly as we've gone through the last sort of 6 months or so, and it's evolving more as we move it through as well. So at the moment we are sort of doing pieces of good news pieces that have, where people have been helped or have done something that's big in the community, and it's evolving even further as we talk now. So it is something that's here to stay, and I think it's something that's brought the community back together. It's something that only BBC Local Radio could probably do. A lot of people will remember very, very similar things going back over a period of time, and you could quite easily say at the beginning this was a rehash of an idea from 20 years ago, but there are only limited ideas in radio and they come around every so often. This has just kind of captured the imagination and it's of the newer audience that probably weren't with us 25 years ago.
So if we talked about the kind of the positive sides, what do you think from your position is perhaps the biggest misconception about local radio?
That we're for old people. BBC local radios traditionally had this image of you talk to a retired person who sat at home and they don't get out, and that's all you talk to. A lot of that was the audience many years ago. The audience has moved through. As I say, sport plays a massive role in what we do. So we have a lot of sport action on social media, which we didn't have maybe even a year or so ago. Our social media offering on sport wasn't as big, and it's about getting those potential audience members that listen to us for sport and moving them through the schedule. So we have the evening show, which is more of the youth-led arts program than what we previously had. Previously, we've had generic evening shows in that slot, just doing exactly the same thing as what we used to do on daytime. Or prior to that, we had specialist music shows that actually would fall down a bit. The audience would fall down a bit of a hole in reality, because if you liked one genre of music on a Monday night, the chances are you wouldn't like what we were doing on a Friday night. So we never had a consistent audience. But it's about taking those people who try us for a couple of hours a week and going, right, you do realise we do this, 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 and this, and actually, whilst we're doing this, this, and this, and this, we also have a bit of a laugh with it as well.
So are you almost spending time at the moment, or in the last few years, looking at who your audience is, how it's changing, and looking at different ways to reach them?
Yeah, I think the audience, the BBC has traditionally had this sort of target of you must target and talk to X person, and people will be familiar with various schemes the BBC ran that got out into the internal schemes that the BBC ran that got out into the main media basis of, well, you're talking to a 55-year-old divorced plumber, and everything you do must reflect their life. I think now we are more focused on the fact of where we come from rather than the aspiration of the people we potentially should be looking at. And sometimes there was that thought of, well, the southern stations, for example, have a very middle class audience, whereas we have a more CD and E audience up here, which we should probably go and harvest a little bit more and get into those different avenues. So the future is obviously social media, and it's about what we can do and what we can get out there. I think coronavirus has given us a bit of a kick up the backside, I suppose, for some parts of social media. One of the traditional things, we used to attend a football press conference every week in the press room at Derby County, where we'd be there along with the written press and the internal press for Derby County and the local TV feeds. We'd get an audio version of the press conference, we'd then clip it out and play bits of it across the rest of the output. That doesn't exist anymore. It's now done as a Zoom conference, which we can record the visuals for, and we can turn around short clips from that and put it out on social media. And our interaction levels have gone sky high from what they were prior to us being able to do that. And on a personal point of view, I'd love to see that remain, because I think that's one of our better offerings, is the fact that we've got the video of the manager talking rather than just a transcribed audio clip of it. And I think if we can drag those people to the main part of the output and then use that output to promote other parts of it and push people towards it, I think we've kind of we'll get where we need to get to.
You touched upon coronavirus, and this may form part of your next answer, but what would you say in terms of your career history within local radio has been your proudest moment?
I think it was possibly, there's been quite a few where I've looked back on things and gone, that was really good. I think actually going back to when I was here before and reshaping our sports output when I was here before. When I arrived here, and I'd already done sort of 6 years in other local radio stations as the sport BA driving the programme every week. And when I arrived here, it was done it felt very old-fashioned. We hadn't changed the imaging for a long time, and it just felt like it needed a bit of a push to move it kicking and screaming into the 2000s. I mean, it was very severely stuck in the 1980s, what we used to do. And I think me coming to it with ideas then, and actually when we had somebody who was a reporter here who, he was a bit of a joker, people didn't really take him too seriously, but he did football, and we wanted to get him on air to do football commentary and football presenting. And I think sort of getting that programme spot on, I've listened back to it recently, and the guy was taken on. He was a reporter in the newsroom. He moved through the newsroom to be the football commentator, the football presenter. He then presented Drive, presented Breakfast. He's sadly no longer with us. He died a couple of years ago. But actually, to see me take this joker, who nobody took seriously as somebody who could do those sort of things, and push him through and go, actually, we've turned this into a major talent. And I think working with that person has been one of my moments in local radio where I've just gone, wow, actually, this has worked really well and worked a lot better than what I thought it would.
It's really nice. It's nice that, you start off in one position, but you can move and kind of grow within. And obviously within such a broad network like the BBC, I suppose the opportunity then helps you into other areas as well if you want to take it.
Yeah, I mean, I having come back here 18 months ago, and I didn't think I would ever come back to local radio because I'd left local radio to get a full-time BBC gig, and my career has taken a complete U-turn. So I was in local radio for about 9 years as a sport BA, throw me on air, do the radio car, just a general person around the station, and needed to get a full-time BBC gig. I got another job outside the BBC that paid the bills. Got a job working for news operations in London. The plan was always to move with 5 Live to Salford. So it never worked in that fashion originally. I went to London for 4 years working across the news output at 5 Live, Radio 4, World Service. Migrated to Salford with 5 Live, so I was part of the first team into Key House when they opened Key House nearly 9 years ago, and was getting on quite happy there. Took a 2-year secondment to train the new news system across the BBC. So we had a roll out of a new IT system and went on a 2-year secondment training that. Went around various parts of the BBC local radio empire and went, actually, this is quite good fun. They still have a good laugh. There's still some really nice people here. It helped that I knew pretty much everybody. And this job came up and I thought, I'll give it a crack. Probably don't even stand a chance of getting an interview. And I got it. And it was scary. It was scary to come back from being away for so long. What was more scary was walking back in and almost picking up where I left off with people that I hadn't seen probably for 13 years were still here. But it's a nice family atmosphere. We have fun here. We know when to turn the serious button on, but we also know when we can turn it on its head and have a laugh with something.
I think that's as well. That's what audiences want too.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of doom and gloom within the news. There's a lot of challenges out there. People want a bit of light and dark at the same time.
They do, and I think I can give you a good example of that. A couple of weekends ago, I run the Weekend Breakfast Show, which is a significantly different offering to what we do during the week. During the week, there is 100% speech between 7 and 8:30. At the weekend, we have music in every hour. And we tend to still focus on the big news stories. So my ethos for the programme, especially on a Saturday, is we'll tell you everything you need to know, but also some of the things you didn't think you needed to know. So we had a guest on a couple of weeks ago. It was National Afternoon Tea Week a couple of weeks ago. We had a guest on who approached us with an idea for coming on and talking about it. And she, from the surface of it, she's an expert on afternoon tea. Double-barrelled name, so you can imagine that we all thought straight away she's going to be posh. So I just said to the presenter, I'm going to surround you with scones, but the things I want to know out of this is it scone or scone, and is it jam or cream first? I don't care really about the rest of it, but I want you to get her to play along with it. And she played along like a trooper straight away, and that provided one of my highlights for the weekend. Equally, last weekend was VJ Day. The National Memorial Arboretum is in our patch. We sent a reporter down. We haven't had a live reporter on weekends for months because of various rota things, and also actually it becomes quite predictable. If you have a reporter every weekend, it just feels like, oh well, we're sending them to something. So I like it more when we have a reporter once in a blue moon, and we sent them down there and they caught the mood of the day perfectly. And that's the contrasts that I like to have. I like to go, well, we'll tell you something serious, but equally, if we can take the mickey out of something and take the rise out of something, then we will.
It's very British. It
is.
Feels like a very British way to do things.
It is, yeah.
You touch upon the kind of the news aspects, the things that the guests that are coming in. Mm-hmm. How do you get your news? Where do you get your news from that makes you think, oh, I need to speak to X or Y or Z?
I'm a bit of a social media monkey, so what I tend to do is look at what's trending, look at the BBC website and see what's the most read. So for the weekends especially, we have a meeting, the producers, and we will bring the presenters in on. And we never used to do this before Corona, so we'd have we'd all come in with separate things, and I just go, yeah, let's just roll with what we've got. Because we're all working in different ways, so I work from home sometimes, some of my producers work from home, the presenters are obviously home-based until they're in the building. I said, let's just get everybody together on a call at 10:30 every Thursday morning, and we'll throw the ideas around. And how we tend to do it is we'll start with a bit of an idea about what we want to do, and then by, I don't know, give me till 4:30 on a Friday afternoon, and I will guarantee that most of the things we've discussed will probably have moved either within the same running order, or they'll have moved out and something else will have come in, because I'll have gone, oh, actually, we do really need to be talking about that. I'm hearing quite a lot of chatter on that. I look at what other outlets are doing in terms across the BBC, so I will look at what Breakfast News are doing, because they tend to have the big national thing, and you can get content from that. I will go to 5 Live and go, okay, well, who are they talking to? Actually, are they going to say anything that's quite controversial that we can use? And we go and we see if we can find a local angle on it. So on the 6 o'clock news a couple of weeks ago, there was a big thing about businesses that have been affected in the East Midlands. So I was watching at home and I heard the East Midlands, so my ears pricked up. So they had a wedding planner who was in our patch. We've never come across this person before, not in our contacts list. They are now, because I've seen them on the telly. They did it. There was a 20-second soundbite they did on the telly. I was like, well, they do a reason. They can speak. They seem to know what they're talking about in terms of how it's affected them. We had them on. We led in with the national story of, this is the national picture. You can now do X, Y, and Z. But how's it affected the local wedding scene? And brought this person in, and she was perfect. She's exactly what we needed. And it's about sort of spotting those things and not being scared to nick audio from somewhere else within the BBC. It's one BBC at the end of the day. Why should audio just get a spin in one position?
Exactly. And I suppose one question that people might have is, are you almost encouraged to share content? You touched upon Whaley Bridge earlier and the different stations. Are you encouraged to work together, or is there a sense of rivalry, but is there that challenge?
I think it depends. Within our patch, if it's a big enough story, we should get it out there and to the wider audience. So the big employer in our area is still Rolls-Royce. If something happens at Rolls-Royce, it's national interest, primarily because of the investment that is in other parts of the country. And similarly with Toyota as well, which is another big employer. I think on those sort of stories, we should push our audio and content as much as we can get it. Yeah, we get looked on by the network boys sometimes of, what do you want to do that for? But equally, if it's one of those borderline areas, and there's a lot of our area that is borderline, so we share patches with Radio Stoke. So Uttoxeter, right out in the west, is one of those no man land places that I sort of touched on a little earlier, because it's so far away from both of the stations. Actually, unless something massive happens, and the massive thing I can think of in the last few years has been Adam Peaty, the Olympic swimmer. Suddenly we're all over Uttoxeter like a rash, as we're Radio Stoke. Similar thing happens at East Midlands Airport. East Midlands Airport is another one of those places that sits right on the border of 3 of the radio stations. So we all claim to own it when something happens, when nothing's really happening. None of us really know who actually should be reporting on it, because it's got from memory, it has a Derbyshire postcode and a Leicestershire phone number, and it's one of those sort of areas. But I do like to encourage us to collaborate as much as we can. So if there is something that is of interest to another radio station, and the VJ stuff was a good example, the audio that we got back from the Arboretum, we passed it to Radio Stoke because they couldn't send a reporter down. It's just outside their patch, but it's still interesting enough for them to want to play the audio out. So those sort of things I will share audio on, and I encourage people to. I think there's a lot of people are scared to bring stuff in that hasn't originated here, and I sit there going, well, if it's originated somewhere else and it's good, let's use it.
So we talked about local. If you were thinking, say, if there were a PR person getting in touch and they had a big national story that had regional links, how important would something like a case study be for you in making the decision whether that works or not?
A case study is better than unless it's a real good talking head, then we prefer case studies, because especially if they're local, because they've got something that people can relate to in the area. What we tend to shy away from is ex-celebrity endorsing ex-products. or a survey has been done and here's Joe Blogs to talk about it, they don't tend to interest us because they don't really have a connection to the patch, and it's more where the product is trying to, it's almost feels like the product is trying to take place because they have to get the name of the sponsor or the company in so many times within the piece. So you end up being lost in a sea of sponsorship, and it almost feels like the ethos of the BBC is being chewed away at on that basis, because you've got Joe Blogs talking about this product who's sponsored this survey. We would generally shy away from those sort of things. But if it's a case study and they've got something to say and they're a good speaker and they're local, then yeah, we would eat those up for breakfast and use them over and over, because they're exactly the sort of normal people, in effect, is what we want.
Now, if we think about coronavirus,
Mm-hmm.
we've touched upon a little bit about how it's affected in terms of plans, staffing, all of those aspects. Do you think there's been a bit of a shift in terms of the types of guests that BBC Radio Derby is looking for? Have you kind of moved towards more experts within sectors, or is that something still changing?
I think that's still changing. I think we went through, at the beginning, we wanted experts because we wanted people to give us answers. And I think we very quickly discovered that wasn't going to happen because nobody actually knew anything about this, or very little anyway. What I like more is people that have been affected. So yes, get me an expert that tells me that I can't travel to X, Y, and Z place, but get me somebody who's already stuck there, and how they're going to get back is probably a better fix for the sound that I'm trying to go for than stodgy travel expert who just sits there and lists a load of countries. I want somebody who's being affected now, because they can tell me what they're going to do about it. I think it's moved from actually there's hundreds of people getting ill with this to there's hundreds of people being disrupted by it more now, which is, I think, more where we're moving to, because every week something changes on that basis. So you can either do something else that you couldn't do a week ago, something gets clamped down on, or there's a new travel restriction put in place. And I think those are the sort of things. It's now affecting people's normal life, as opposed to we're all in lockdown and we can't really do anything about it.
If we were to be thinking further down the line,
Mm-hmm.
are you when this all first started, a lot of the forward planning and those kind of elements disappeared, or were certainly kind of dimmed down. Are you back to forward planning? Are there big moments? Obviously, we've lost a lot of the sporting events, but are you planning anything for the rest of the year?
We've got a few big things. So we used to do quite a big series of summer events when we had no football coverage. So we'd make big things out of a lot of local radio stations do a thing called Shire Day. So insert county name there. So it was started here. So we had our former breakfast presenter 14, 15 years ago came up on the idea of having a flag for the county, which then became Derbyshire Day. He's since taken that idea elsewhere. And we go to local attractions on this one day of the year, and we do quite a lot on it. Well, we're trying to do something a bit different this year, but we're still holding Derbyshire Day. We tie in with the City Council, and they have a big classical music concert in one of the big open parks every year. Well, they're not doing that this year, but we are broadcasting a classical music concert virtually with them on Facebook as well as on air. So we're still doing those elements. Some of the outside broadcasting things that we would have done, we've pulled back on because we can't work in the same way that we used to be able to work. We haven't got the facilities in terms of staff at the moment, because we are limited on the number of people we're allowed to have in any one place, and close working's a no-no anyway at the moment. So those sort of big things where we'd go and make an event and grab people and get them there, they've disappeared off the calendar. I think one of the things that helps us was having a limited amount of sports back for 6 weeks, and then us having almost 6 weeks off before the start of the new season, as opposed to it being 3 months off. We had those 3 months, I suppose, earlier on when everything got cancelled, but we got other things to take their place. So we are hoping that we get some form of event stuff around this, trying to make something out of the sport when it comes back in a couple of weeks, but not kill everything off, because I think to take everything out of it would be a sacrifice too far. So there are things that we just look at and go, can we still do that? can we do it in a different way? Can we do it virtually? Or is it too risky because it will attract crowds that we don't want to encourage? So there's, even going forward, can we do the traditional BBC Local Radio Carol service as we've done it in the past? There's a question we still don't have an answer to at the moment.
You've been listening to Broadcast Revolution's Radio Road Trip. Follow us on Twitter @BroadcastRevo and Instagram @BroadcastRevolution. #Join the Broadcast Revolution.